You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
We're not doing this again. We're not going to stare gazingly into each other's eyes as we come up with a joke or something inappropriate to say. So I'm going to make you start it, sir. Kevin, Mr. Kevin, you now have the floor. Here we go again.
He's such an easy target. You know that, folks.
Whoa, easy. What were we doing now? A Jeep show or something like that?
We're supposed to.
Okay.
Hey, guys. If you haven't figured out by now, welcome to On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. I'm Kevin, the engineer. You know, and across from me, I'm not even going to go with the other stuff because across from me over here looking like he's trying to think. And
I already thought of coming. We should have said, you know, I'm Scott, I'm the engineer, I read the instructions and I do this. You can be Kevin the slapstick parts guy because we're going to do a show 180. Haha. That joke stinks. But anyways, hi.
Well, you are correct on that basic point. But go ahead and introduce yourself.
I am Scott. I'm now confused and wondering what just happened.
It's show 180.
It's show 180, yes.
It was your joke and you forgot already.
I mean, I'm like a goldfish, man. I swim around once around that bowl. I forgot what I was doing.
Ooh, look at that.
Exactly. Oh, look, a tail. So anyways, while we always will share what works for us as well as what didn't, it's always up to you to do your research, read the instructions, and like me, swimming in my own little bowl, follow it.
Yeah, please. Yeah, it's been an interesting week. Actually, two, technically.
Yes.
But, you know, for the last week, that things have been going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Scott and I decided for this show, we're going to drag you guys into one of our conversations that we have, particularly when we're en route somewhere to either go see somebody or go help somebody or go check something out neat.
Or and we got ourselves.
Yeah, well, that too. But we had an interesting conversation, and we were talking about preferences in your Jeeps. And Scott was talking about the Gladiator versus his
Lowrider.
LJ versus my TJ, to the point that he was over here at the time in his LJ that he gets the ruler out and walks over, and he walks over to slightly altered, and I will pick up there with the, and what were you doing, Scott?
I had Jeep envy. You know, because here I am. I just installed the metal cloak lift. You know, I went from the Skyjacker 4-inch comfort ride. Just take out the comfort. But the point is that the Jeep seems lower.
It appears lower. It
appears lower. Now, when I did lose an inch or half an inch because it was a 4-inch to a 3.5.
Yeah.
But again, Kevin's Jeep, just slightly altered, always looked taller than quantum entanglement. So I just said, you know what? I'm going to bust out the ruler. And instead of measuring the fenders, because he has those aftermarket wide body fenders, you know, like a Testarossa. But so I started like, you know, from the fender, flat part of the fender with a ruler sticking out to there, determined that the difference in height is only about a half an inch.
Yep.
Which kind of made me feel better. But it's like, man, why does my Jeep look so much lower? Well, Kevin and I did some math. We also took off a 48-pound weight off my front bumper.
Yep.
And, you know, found out that, you know, again, the LG does weigh more.
Quite a bit more.
And you have the first-gen springs. I have the second-gen springs.
Yeah, folks, my 3.5 lift when initially put on the TJ, if you go back to some of the earliest shows, you'll realize that I had almost 5 inches of lift over the worn-out stock springs. I'm not saying that from the stock springs new, they weren't a 3.5 lift, but compared to what I took off, yeah, it felt like I was climbing Mount Everest just to get into the Jeep. And my wife looked at me and she says, I'm supposed to get in that. Now it's settled down to where I have probably close to 4 inches of lift. And I know that in later generations of spring wind, they have come closer to the actual stated dimension of 3.5. And of course, Scott does have the LJ, so his body weight is a little bit higher on the Jeep.
Big old winch on the
front. Well, I have a winch on mine too, but you also have all the other stuff you carry around in the back. You know, your speaker boxes and stuff. Your Jeep is never empty.
Yeah, no, I got the locker back there for tools, and that bag is actually heavy. I actually do have some tools. I'm actually thinking about that right now, going, you know, when I pick up that bag, that has my, I have the 6-ton bottle jack, and a handful of other things. I'm kind of like, you know, that bag alone is probably another 70 pounds.
Yeah. So, you know, the fact that you do have a little bit lower ride is, to me, within realm of makes sense, you know, but that's just me. But we got to talking as we were driving along and discussing lift kits and people's, what do I want to call it, their views and interpretations of different things, opinions about what they're doing with their Jeep. And I'm being vague deliberately because it brought us up to an epiphany point and realized that we hadn't had a discussion on this. And even though we've had the discussion, we're going to redo the discussion again because it was kind of cool. Because number one, folks, I'm going to start off with the same thing that I told Scott is, do most people know what ground clearance is? Ask yourself, do you know what ground clearance actually means?
Right.
And where would you measure your ground clearance? And I'm going to tell you that most people I talk to get this one wrong, even accomplished Jeepers. Most of them will go over and they'll walk right up to the middle of their belly of the Jeep and go right here. And I'm like, no, that's not ground clearance. Ground clearance by definition is the point from a level surface of ground to the lowest point on the belly of your Jeep. And what is typically the lowest point?
It's going to be the differentials.
Correct. It's the differential. So Scott and his mixer board. So the only thing, and I can remember reading, heavens, back in the 70s, when I was paying attention to, Four-Wheeler Magazine and Four-Wheel Off-Road and Jeep Magazine and, the crew that were writing those. And I remember an article written, and I can't remember exactly who wrote it, but it was rather blunt. The only way to actually lift a Jeep in terms of 100% lift is bigger tires. Suspension lifts, nope. Body lifts, nope. They don't change. They don't actually lift a Jeep. How's that to twist your brain?
The only thing they help is a breakover angle, but we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that. Or to make clearance for what does lift a Jeep, larger diameter tires. That is what lifts the low point, i.e. the differential higher. And if you wrap your head around it. Now, if you have independent suspension, that doesn't play into it because you're changing angles and you can lift it with springs and things like that. But with straight axles that we have in our Wranglers, you got to go with a bigger tire. So how big of a lift do you need? Or is it cheaper eventually to maybe just change out the axle? And we'll get with that as we go along. Then there's the other things, which is what is your breakover angle?
Right.
Well, that's also known as the high center point. Now that's the middle of your Jeep. And that's actually an angle that if you were to draw a straight line from the contact point of your front tires to the middle of your Jeep, and an equidistant angle from the back tires to the center point of your Jeep. All right. And those are your breakover angles. And now that's officially when the wheel on both sides have full weight on them, but the belly just touches. You can push that, obviously. And a lot of people do.
With the throttle.
But you got to figure out what happens here is a very simple balancing act. When you're on high center of something and you still have enough weight through the springs on the tire for traction, sometimes you can push over that hump or bulldoze the dirt out of the way, like my TJ skid pan does.
Well, that's why
tends to bring some with me, but
well, that's why they call it the shovel.
Yeah. The key is the actual angle of breakover is just when you touch, not when you're actually removing the dirt or the grease and grime. I consider it just scratching the Jeep's belly. It needs a little scritchy under there. Make it happy. That way it won't roll over and ask me to pay and scritch the bottom. So it comes close occasionally.
Between Gun of the Trail Dog and the Gladiator, the Trail, not Jeep, everyone wants scritches.
So that's your breakover. And then your approach and departure angles are angles between your front bumper or whatever is your low front item and the contact point of your wheel. And again, that's just touching. I know lots of guys that will use that front lower bumper or skid pan and just slide it up the hill.
Use it as a battering ram.
Okay, but that's above the actual, approach angle or departure. I've had problems with my departure angle, absolutely closing my exhaust pipe to the point that the engine quit. Exactly. And then having to cut it back.
Who's driving a harmonica?
Well, yeah, that was pretty close. So I relocated my exhaust pipe so that it would get smashed, but it would get pushed up into the cavity under the body and then fall back down and continue to exhale rather than Scott's sound effects over there. So you can change your departure angle with a lift kit.
Right.
All right. So that's where springs and body play in. So springs can adjust your high center and your approach and departure angles, but they still don't lift the low point, which is your differentials. All right. Body lifts. Body lifts really don't do much beyond provide tire clearance, because your approach points, which are your front bumper nominally, your rear nominally, there may be stuff you bolted on that comes lower than that, and your wheels doesn't change with a body lift.
Right.
Okay. The belly pan doesn't change with a body lift. All right. So all of these things play together. So number one, if you're going rock bouncing, you want to pay attention to let's at least two of those. You want to look at your tire size. I have complete understanding why people want to go 44s, 46s, in the rock field. And then they'll also go with high pinion differentials, because high pinion differentials put more of the case above the center line of the axle for the same size axle. Okay. I went with high pinion 44s in the front of slightly altered. I paid more for it. There's no question about it. But that change alone gave me almost an inch of ground clearance, true ground clearance, with 33 tires.
Right.
Okay. Could I go larger? I could, but I've just learned to pay attention. Of course, if you know where your high points are, if you have either a spotter or just a good set of eyes, you can put the differential not over the highest point on the trail and not get stuck. There's a guy that taught me back, I'm not even sure he's still alive. I haven't been in contact with him in 30 years. But anyhow, he said the secret to not getting stuck is put your tire on the highest obstacle.
Okay.
All right. If you can do it without flipping over. That was the qualifier. But if you put your tire on the high spot, you can't get high centered on the high spot.
Right.
Because your tire does a good job of lifting you up. And if you watch guys in the rock fields with spotters, particularly on the TV or shows or the YouTubes and stuff like that, you will see the spotter directing the front tire to the high spot on that line so that the rest of the Jeep clears. And they'd rather risk the rollover than knowing they're going to get high centered. So that's kind of the difference. So your tires are actually what give you ground clearance. Your suspension, on the other hand, changes your approach and your breakover angle and your departure angles. Okay. Right. And then your body lift is just there to help get clearance for the rest of the stuff we just talked about, primarily the tires. Or you can go with a cutout fender. I prefer the cutout fender. That's my preference because I don't want to raise my center of gravity any higher. That's the other thing people got to remember is as you start going up piece by piece by piece, you're raising your center of gravity on a narrow, short wheelbase vehicle, particularly when you're talking about a Wrangler, just about any one of the Wranglers except the big old four-door JKJLs. But they're still a narrower track, compared to a full-width pickup truck or something like that.
Yeah.
And the same thing, boy, when you get in the YJs, TJs, CJs, get down to the little Willies, you have one, Scott. You know how tiny that sucker is.
Yeah. Well, just to byline before, I don't want to have our veteran listeners go, this seems kind of remedial, and it kind of is. But at the same time, if you're driving the higher center of gravity vehicles, as Kevin's talking about, putting your tire on the obstacle, this also can help save your driveline issues. This can also help save your drive shaft from getting thrashed on a rock.
Yep.
It's good stuff to know and learn. What is your breakover angle? What is your approach and departure angle? I already know, my breakover angle, even with the lift on the Gladiator, sucks.
It does.
I know
particularly on the back end. There's a long overhang out the back.
That departure angle is,
and what does that mean in real life? That means when you're approaching things, you can get the front wheels on things that your back end won't come across. So you don't realize it till it's too late, and you're sorry to be kind of pointed about this, but your Gladiator's acting like a dog on a rug with a butt scratch.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing too. That's why the bed bob is very popular with the Gladiator. I will tell you this right now, and this is me saying it because I own one. Is the Gladiator the panacea trail vehicle or rock crawler and whatnot? No, it's a great overlander. Yeah, it's a great vehicle for the sand dunes. It's a great vehicle for moderate trail use and having some off-camera situations. That's fun. Yep. But at the same time, you can
bring the grill.
and I can bring the grill. Jerk. But the point is that, no, you own and you live and die by that, TJ, young man. You cut your grill in half. So
you've seen the size of the grill I take.
I know, but again, so there are people that have 42s and use their Gladiator for rock bouncing and all that, and 6-inch lifts, and that's great, and that's awesome. By all means, enjoy it. That's your Jeep. You built it for that. I didn't. I inherited this one, and so again, just because I put the Amazon snorkel on there doesn't mean I'm taking it for a swim. But at the same time, the LJ is going to see the more of the, we'll call it hardcore wheeling or moderate core wheeling in my case. And those are things like, because again, did I struggle with the idea of putting arched fenders and 35s on the LJ? Would it look great? Yeah, sure. Maybe one day I'll do 35s. But, I also got to get my first paycheck for my new job first,
Which, by the way, folks, he's gainfully employed. Yay!
And yes, and the best part is that I'm doing what I did back in 2013, so I'm working in a collision center again.
Yeah.
Yay!
And for a parent brand.
Well, it's lateral move brand, but again, I'm happy to do it. But again, back to the Jeep subjects, is that these are situations that I think about. Again, I suffer from the parking lot, envy, because again, I joke about the low rider. Yeah. But you also have to remember, and I call it like the bigger fish paradox. Is how much okay. Oof. Great. I just did something. I don't know. I summoned a demon or something. But no, and not the car. Is no matter how much I look at these other LJs on 37s and whatnot, and wow, that's cool. That's a great vehicle. That's awesome. There's also people looking at me going, man, that's a really great Jeep. I'd love to have an LJ Rubicon with the 6-speed and all that. It's kind of like what we always talk about, being happy with your Jeep. As much as I said, I'm pretty much done with the LJ, I don't think I'm there yet because I still want to tinker with it. Yeah. There are some things I'm still trying to figure out. The Gladiator's getting more and more to being done. Yeah. I mean, I just recently put the painted, this is another thing to talk about, fender clearance. Yeah. I literally threw a wrench in the entire Gladiator world. Yeah. I put Max Toe painted fender flares on a Rubicon Gladiator, and everyone was like, that's blasphemy. Don't you want the big high arched front fenders that looks like I'm trying to mount something? No. The one, I wanted painted fenders, but the symmetry to me was off. Yeah. That's what I have bump stops for, so I don't eat a tire. I actually have enough clearance with the bump stops and the lift to run 37s just fine. I'm not there yet because I like my gear ratios. I like how comfortable it rides. But that was my personal choice because I'm not going to be off-roading the Gladiator at this moment like I would the LJ. Yeah. So these are decisions that I made and I bench built and I thought about and got a heck of a good deal on some fenders, to be honest with you.
This is true.
And sold my old ones for the same price practically. But these are things that I thought about. These are things that I looked at and said to myself as I'm trying to articulate my thoughts with my hands, and Kevin's trying not to laugh at me, is these are all part of my build. So... Again, I don't know where I was going with that. It sounded really good, though, didn't it, Kevin? Oh, breakover angles and all that. Yeah. Now, my approach angle, though, totally different because I have the Mopar narrow width bumper, the stubby. And so my approach angles are great. It's just getting the rest of the Gladiator over it.
The departure angle isn't quite up to the approach angle. And anybody that's had what we used to call the long tail pickups back in the day when you had a short cab and an 8-foot bed and you had 3.5 foot behind your axle hanging out there with a big old, step bumper. And you found out real quick that departure angle ruled. And I saw guys try to hit it at speed and not make it. And they're sitting there with their nose in the sand. Front wheels are still steering, but the rear bumper's sitting on the hill, and the rear tire suspension is at complete droop, and the tires are hanging in midair. It's like, well, you can change your tire here, and then the funnest thing is, of course, once you get it in that position, try to get it out.
Oh, yeah.
It was just, you can't just, well, you can if you have enough weight. You can pull the front end, but a lot of times the bumpers came off rather than the front end coming up. So you literally had to lift up the front end, or we found just pivoting it off the hill sideways, pulling it sideways, we could eventually drag the back end down one tire at a time.
It doesn't matter. There's about to be a lot of scrunching noises as things lose paint and come off.
Yeah, well, that happens quite frequently, unfortunately. Yeah. So now the key with this discussion that we had was just, it's amazing how many people don't understand what the function of each part of a Jeep modification are. The fact that, well, I'm going to lift it. Okay, you're going to lift the Jeep. Yeah, I'm going to put a 6-inch lift on it. Okay, you realize that doesn't change your ground clearance. Oh, yeah, it does. It brings the belly pan up. That's your breakover angle or your approach angle, or your clearance for ground clearance is by the differential. So you got to get your tires. And then you get your tires on, oh, gee, I need more clearance for my tires. Well, the one that's positive is, yes, the lift kit on the suspension clears bigger tires with some fender trimming, usually still, because your circle diameter of your cutouts for your wheels is still tight at the bottom. But anyway, the idea is that, and then body lift, if you're desperate, that there are situations, I will tell you, a body lift can work, but it's not I'm not the biggest fan of them. I think you're better off with a good quality engineered suspension lift and larger tires. That combination, yes, gets your ground clearance and increases your breakover angle, your approach angle, and your departure angle. Unless you have a really good skid pan, be careful with that breakover angle. I have seen Jeeps on the rock piles teetering. Yeah. Just kind of rocking from the rear wheels to the front wheels, to the rear wheels to the front wheels. And the problem that people forget is even if you push it over, usually you get your drive shafts and they bend, and you now have the world's biggest concrete vibrator.
Pretty much.
Well, and you go visit our friends at Gulf Coast Drive Shaft for two new ones.
But the other options too, like we touched on, is like the LCG builds, lower center of gravities. Yeah. Now that's a whole nother thing.
It really isn't. Well, it really isn't.
Because instead of modifying suspension, you're cutting away body, arch fenders, and stuff like that.
Well, again, we're going back to the fact that they still have the same problem in that it takes a larger tire. But instead of lifting the whole chassis and body to get tire clearance, they are cutting away parts. Rather than adjusting the tire to clear the body, they're clearing the body to it. They're adjusting the body to clear the tires. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And that's the whole secret of the low center of gravity is you're keeping the mass of the vehicle low. To do that, you're usually sacrificing up travel and you're cutting away body parts. High arch fenders came about from the low CG concept. All right. Yes, it works really well on higher CG vehicles, but lower CG just keeps the center of gravity, which is roughly, I'm going to just use a rule of thumb, it's about at the height of your crankshaft of your engine.
Okay.
And it goes straight back through your vehicle. And it varies, in all honesty, because there's actually a different forward center of gravity up nose of the vehicle where the engine is versus the back. But since the heavy stuff's up front, you usually use the front as your control. But the key there is what your tip over. And you need to know your CG point to know where your width of your axles, what your tip over angle is. Okay. And that's the whole thing. Same thing as breakover angle, but it's side to side rather than front to back. And again, bigger tires, though, on the other hand, they raise your CG. They get you up higher, but they also make you less stable. If you keep the same size tire diameter, but you widen your axles, you've lowered. You have the same CG, but you've lowered your track. So your brake over your tilt angle has increased. Okay. You can go further before you tip over. Does that make sense? You flattened the triangle rather than pointing up the triangle in the middle. If you think about a pyramid, it'd be relatively easy to tip over than something that's a flat, mushroom shape. That's a lot wider than it is tall. And when you start getting up to to a spire, it tips over pretty easy, right? Because the base isn't very big versus the height. It's a ratio of the width to the height, and so there's all these factors that play into a well thought out lift, right? But the point of all of this is what are you using it for? Yeah, you really don't need a really low CG on Florida trails. Right. We don't get that far off camber in 99% of the time. Mm-hmm. Yes, if you go to the man-made obstacles and they put one of those frickin' paver blocks like they did at Jeep Beach out there that was 4 foot high, the big square cubes, and people are trying to drive up them, yeah, you can get your CG outside your tires and flip over.
Yeah.
As we witnessed
Right.
several times. But in general, Florida sand isn't stable at that point. So if you make a mound that high in one rainstorm, and suddenly you can drive over it with a stock Jeep. Yeah. But on the other hand, if you're out there and our good friends in Montana and Red Rock and those areas, yeah, you can get yourself in real trouble. So then you may want to pay attention to your center of gravity. I jokingly, we did a couple of the events ago out at Jeeping with Judd where the microphone to my CB was hanging loose, and it was acting like an inclinometer.
Yeah.
And when it was pointing all the way over at the bottom of the passenger's door, we felt the uphill side getting a little light because I was getting close to getting outside of the center of gravity point of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. But it's just one of those things, again, when you think about what you want to use your Jeep for.
Right.
And if all it is a show vehicle, that's fine. And I don't judge. And I don't think Scott does either. If you want to build the wildest Jeep and it never leaves the parking lot, I can't tell you how many I see here in Florida that are awesome looking, but they've got Bluetooth front drive shafts, and the like.
I can't, it's funny you said that because literally right now.
Yeah.
Last time Kevin and I recorded, I left here and my throwout bearing in the LJ went out. Mm-hmm. And it's funny he said Bluetooth drive shaft because I've been chasing a driveline vibration. So the LJ actually this past 2 months has been running the Bluetooth drive shaft. Mm-hmm. And at another place I was at, a young man said, that's a nice Gladiator. No offense. Has it ever been off-road? Let me show you the pictures. I'm sorry. I keep my stuff clean. But I do actually have a question, though, on the subject about
CG, ground
thank
clearance.
you, all that stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is one of the conversations we had. Now, let's say on that level of ground clearance and lifts and all that, we talked about, adding a locker to the front or back on a hill climb, because obviously we don't see a lot of those here in Florida. Mm-hmm. But when you get into hill climb, I was always taught by an Australian gentleman that put the locker in the front, so that way it pulls you over the obstacle rather than on the rear where you have a higher chance of offloading the front suspension and rolling backwards.
Well, I'm going to say that's conditional because in many cases he's wrong, and in several cases he's right.
Okay.
Because as you climb a hill, okay, weight shifts to the rear tires. Mm-hmm. So you actually unload your front tires. So having a locker up there can actually be detrimental because you don't have the pressure on them to utilize it, and then they break free and you lose steering. On the other hand, if you're in a level situation trying to get on something, then a front locker helps because you've got all the mass of the engine. But again, weight and gravity is one of those funny little things, is you kind of have to look at it separately. Like the weight of the engine when you're sitting on the ground goes straight about midships of the engine straight down. And so, yeah, it's pushing greatly, 600, 700 pounds straight down on that front axle.
Okay.
But it's always pointing down no matter which way your Jeep is pointing. And if the nose is pointing up, let's say you're climbing a really steep embankment that's 60 degrees, only 40% of that weight of that engine is on the front axle now. 60% of it's on the rear.
Gotcha.
Okay. And the rear is having to push the front along. So having that front grip is less of a help than you think, whereas the rear is doing most of the work at that point. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense.
But on the other hand, coming down this other side of the hill, it's reversed because even in the gas tank and the rear end is really unloaded. Okay. And everything's on the front axle. So I hate to say it, but that's one of the reasons I got two buttons.
Well, yeah.
One says front, one says rear. But yes, I realize that that's double the expense, double the effort, and you have to think about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of situations, though, that getting started on the hill, getting that initial climb, a front locker would help you immensely. That's absolutely. The downside, of course, is you've seen me and you've actually been behind me on the trails where it was slippery and my front locker's locked and I had traction to go forward and I turned the wheels and absolutely nothing happens.
Yeah, but that's all part of the fun.
Yeah, except for that tree.
Come on. It's okay, George of the Jungle. Just move.
Yeah. And so, so you
I
learn.
just showed how old we are.
Yes. But no, I've got growth rings, as people joke about, in my little extended flares that you were talking about, from tree distortions, trees reaching out and going, this looks better over there.
Yeah.
Go that way.
It's like your fenders or the bumpers while bowling. It's fine.
Pretty much.
Boing, boing,
The tire
boing,
or the
boing,
fender.
boing.
But, so there's.
Boing, boing, crunch. Oh.
Yeah, that's happened too. I know how to do body work, though.
As opposed to the lawnmower deck you rebuilt out of there with 2 straws and a paper clip.
No, it was just a leftover piece of 16-gauge steel. But
Very impressive. Sorry to byline.
Florida sand's abrasive out here, and then particularly when you let it go to the point that it's thin as sheet. The sheet metal is as thin as paper, and then it folds underneath on a bump, and the blade catches it.
Yeah.
Crunch, 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 ding, 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 ding.
Transformers. Now it's just scrap.
Yeah. So we did little what do they call it? Cut and butt weld job. That's what it's called. Okay.
Okay. No. Again, I don't know. I pulled up you sizzling bacon.
Now, I don't know if you guys body work out there, but there's a process when you want to made up a piece, and if you can lay the new piece over the old so that it lines up where you want on your lines, and then clamp it down or tack weld it even just overlaid, and then you go along and you pick a section and you cut through both pieces and pull the waste off of that way, in a section without disturbing the rest of it. And then the cuts will line up perfectly with, like if you run a 1 mil slicing disc, it will, leave a 1 mil gap, which is perfect for sheet metal welding. And then I use my copper paddle to push down the high piece, because it will be the thickness of the metal high.
Right.
And it'll flex down that perfect, and then go spot, tack, spot, tack, spot, tack, and then you move over, cut another section, spot, tack, and you work your way around the piece, and you get a perfect cut and a perfect alignment surface to surface. And then you go in and skip tack in between, and skip tack in between all those, and finally you close it up and grind it off, and you saw the finish, and it's on the lower curve section of the deck, and you can't even find where I cut it in. And so that's the term that's used throughout most of the body, is the cut and butt.
Okay.
And if you can say cut, butt, tack.
We're going to get a cease and desist now.
Why?
I'm just kidding.
It's a technical process. I'm sorry. There's a lot of construction, maintenance, manufacturing, fabrication terms that are not for mixed company, and that really is probably one of the least of the, remember what the concrete vibrators that they hold in their hands that go.
I know you and I are talking about actual tools and stuff being used and all that, but now we're on a watch list.
Yeah. So anyhow, back to the suspensions. If you guys out there are listening and you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear them, because it's one of those things. This is the way I was taught. Okay, and back in the days of Big Ollie, running the U100 Bronco lifted, doing the Bajas and that kind of stuff, and I love those old trucks. And yes, I spent a lot of time in the early square body Chevys, and did a lot of off-roading them. Did a lot of crunching them, unfortunately, back in
where he learned to do body work.
Yeah, and for straightened frames. It's amazing what you can do if you're out in the old strip mines that weren't reclaimed in western Pennsylvania. And
quick, tie it to the tractor and floor it. We'll get this frame.
Well, that's true. We tied one end of it was a vehicle.
I was joking. You really did that?
Oh, we had an Opel Kadett set up for off-roading, like a Baja buggy. And one of my friends took it over a hill and missed and hit a tree, and he could only turn left, because he bent the suspension and the frame horns. And we got it back to the farm doing 270 lefts to go right. And then drug it over, and we chained the back end of the offended frame to a fence post down low. And then put the other one onto the front where I wanted to pull. And then I used my 4-cylinder International Harvester frame straightener. No, pull it a little harder.
Guys, what you're not understanding is I said that in a joke.
You did?
Yes.
I thought you knew that.
No, well, clearly I do now.
We literally straightened it until vehicle drove straight. I would say the front end alignment and frame straightening was within a quarter inch. Yeah, maybe not up to your body shop standards, but we were a bunch of teenage boys ripping through the coal, COAL.
Oh,
cuts.
You broke me. You broke me there, homie. You broke me.
Oh God, I wish. And we didn't have cell phones then, which is probably a good thing.
Bobby, bring me the carrier pigeon. We got to send Ma a note.
We've had a few of those incidents too. Glenn, how do we get out of here? What do you mean? It broke both motor mounts. Motor just wants to turn over and die in the engine bay.
Well, the good news is our Opel Kadett now is an airplane. What do you mean? Just because of the engine's spinning. It's not a radial motor.
Yeah, well, it didn't have doors on it, so we welded leaf springs across the openings.
I'm serious.
Stop. We did put a roll cage in it.
Before or after your first rollover, and you realized
before.
you needed one?
No, my dad already was an engineer and took one look at me as a mechanical engineer. He says, "You putting a roll cage in that? No questions asked." Yes, sir. My dad was military. It was definitely yes, sir.
I just, I've known you for 7 years now, but longer than that. We've been broadcasting for 7 years, and then I've known you since 2014. I don't want to do math. And the point is, oh my God, that's 9 years. No, 10 years, because in 2003.
A decade, as they say.
No, 2013. Yeah, 2013.
Yes, that's 10 years.
I just had to math.
Ooh,
My
that's
brain
a smoke.
broke. Did you leave the welder on? No, I smell smoke.
I thought you knew that.
I made a joke.
Okay, sorry.
See, what you guys really don't understand is I keep making jokes about him being Obi-Wan Kenobi, so now I'm worried one day he's going to use the Force and come get me with the Millennium Falcon. We're going to go blow up a Death Star.
Han Solo had the Millennium Falcon. Obi-Wan just wore those robes and walked around the desert with a lightsaber.
But the last time Obi-Wan was alive, he was in the aluminum Falcon.
Yeah. The aluminum Falcon.
You haven't seen that?
Yeah.
It's Robot Chicken. Wait, slow down. What do you mean? What's an aluminum Falcon? What happened to the Death Star? You've been flying around 2 weeks looking for a signal? God, you probably must smell like burnt bacon wrapped in feet. You have a call for Senator Palpatine. Oh my God, you have to watch that.
He has come completely off the rails.
Oh
folks.
my God, that is the most hilarious thing ever.
I have seen Robot Chicken.
Yeah.
It's just a little too strange.
You got a MasterCard in that suit there, buddy? I can't just go buy a new Death Star. What the heck? What the hell is an aluminum Falcon?
I don't know. The fact that he watched it, I can handle, but the fact that he's memorized it is scary.
Oh, don't get me started on Princess Bride. Where are we at now, Jeeps? That's right.
I do remember Princess Bride.
Yes, I'll tell you what. Back to the beginning, Vicini.
So, yes, don't ask. When it comes to fabrication, I have been there, worn the flannel shirt and the blue jeans and the Stetson. Yeah, and a few other things that we don't mention publicly,
Meanwhile, the other side of the financial department on his end was sitting on a statue at Penn State. Did I get that right? What's the animal
Yes,
called?
it's the Nittany Lion. I went to college at Penn State, got my degree in engineering up there, and met my wife there. And we have a dating picture with her posed on the back of the Nittany Lion, and I'm standing there beside it. And
No. Keep going, Mr. Flannel Shirt, Stetsons.
I've already said that.
I know. Okay, I'm just messing with you.
Okay,
And meanwhile, I'm the kid with the curly hair on all my pictures. Everyone goes, "Whoa, that was weird, Scott. Wow, you had hair and a mullet."
No, the usual comment I get is when they look at the pictures and they go, "Did you always have a beard?" Oh, yeah, it tickled on the way out. No. No, it came in about 16, 17, 18, and then it was one of those things that, well, if it's growing, I might as well keep it. It was a Grizzly Adams era where it was cool.
It's like the Santa Claus. He'd shave it off and immediately grow back in. It's like, oh, man.
Pretty close.
What was funny is while he's out there, fabricating all this stuff in his shop and welding and grinding and doing all these things, I'm like, oh, man, it brings you back to when you were 3 years old, doesn't it?
That's what he said. I'm looking at him like,
no, it was 6. No, but back to the Jeeps and everything. We got a little tangent.
We did. We did. That's what you normally do to me.
But I do actually, anything else you want to touch? Because I actually just did think of a neat little subject.
Oh, let's go ahead and wander down that blind end trail that you've got.
Yeah, I deserve that. So if you own a worn winch, You may have seen on the interwebs that the Warren series, the cheaper ones. Is it the Xeon ones? I can't. It's the cheaper ones,
Okay.
the 10S and stuff. Now, if you have the Bluetooth remote on your winch controller,
Yep.
they are telling you to inspect it for corrosion if it got wet, because they're having some issues. So if you have one of those, you definitely want to check it out, because it's actually the winch I own. And as I'm sitting here talking to Kevin right now, 2 weeks ago when I found this, I realized I haven't inspected it yet.
Oh, yeah, that would probably be good.
Yeah, that probably would be good.
And I'm not sure what form the problem is, in that either it doesn't work or is it that it runs on.
It causes the battery, from what I read on the, it causes the controller to come on and energize and start the winch.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, so that's the thing you have to be careful with, is that biggest problem with a winch is, and which one do you have? The 9,000 or the 12,000?
I have the 10,000S.
Okay, so you have 10,000S. So if that controller gets corroded and comes on, there's 10,000 pounds trying to rip the front of your Jeep apart. Mm-hmm. And God forbid if somebody's hand's in there.
Yep.
I've never, and I'm sorry, this is just me, so this is personal opinion of Kevin Powell. I've never been fond of wireless of remotes for winches, for the simple reason that you're putting your controls out into public use. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In other words, if somebody else has a controller on the same frequency, can you get crosstalk? Can you do, wired is still not perfect. There's always a chance something can happen there, but for the most part, they're less likely to, they have a longer history of working well.
Yeah.
I have seen the problem with early wireless are run-ons. You let go of the button and it takes the winch a heartbeat or two to realize and to stop, and it spools down. And I saw it, we timed it, and it was taking like 6 inches of cable in. And if you're going, oh, you know what?
As your hand's being pulled into it.
Yeah, 6 inches is a lot. And they've gotten better. I'll be the first one to say that. They have gotten better. But there's still that concern in the arena there of, okay, is it in my pocket? Is it going to trigger, And
I just thought of something.
what's that?
And if you give me the wave off, we can cut this out.
No.
But if you are having a moment where something is catastrophically happening, can't you just slam the thing into free spool real quickly?
If you're standing by the winch.
Okay.
And where do we tell people you really shouldn't be standing if you're pulling hard?
In front of the winch.
Yeah, because you're in
Okay.
the no zone. And you may not be able to pop it out.
Okay.
Because under load, the clutch you may not be strong enough to disengage it,
Gotcha.
And that's a concern. The electronics, I look at the fact that, you'd be pushing the back button. You got to wait for the controller to actually pull the relays back. There really is this is when we train people on winches, folks, you got to understand that you have a little machine down there that has no brain, has no feelings, no smarts. It does exactly what the electronic controller tells it to do, or the wired controller switches, and it's either wind in or wind out. There is, and people, well, it doesn't pull that hard. Yeah, it does. If you try and stop it, you're not. It's pulling 9,000 pounds capable instantly. There is nothing you're going to do, so you have to treat it with respect. It is capable of doing immense damage to the vehicle, to you, to bystanders. Snapped cables are, if you've seen one snap, and I have, it's terrifying. You have a 3/8 inch steel bullwhip with a flayed end swinging wildly. And I guarantee you're not tough enough to stop that.
My favorite one is actually had a discussion with a coworker because, Mythbusters, did the whole, will it cut you in half? And, I can't remember if it was yes or no, but my point is this. It's still going to hurt. And I really don't want to spend the afternoon after wheeling in an emergency room.
Yeah, it may not cut you in half. And a lot of it depends on the human body. Where does it cut you?
Yeah.
If you are cut, unfortunately, if it catches you right at your knee joint, it is going to separate your knee. Mm-hmm. And it may take it in 2 pieces. It may not. Do you want to try?
Yeah. Use the dampener. Use the floor mats. Use the proper equipment. Because
or go to a synthetic line.
Yes.
Because synthetic lines will snap and drop. They don't whip. They have very low elasticity, which is why people don't like them, because steel stretches. You don't realize it. That's where the whip comes from. But synthetic lines don't have the elasticity. They're more rigid. As weird as it sounds, it doesn't seem like that'd be right, but they're more rigid in tension. And when they break, they literally just drop. Now, there's still going to be fragments. I wouldn't be straddling one when it broke or anything like that, but it's less likely to go whipping off sideways. Whereas winch cables, all the way up to aircraft arrestor cables, I've seen videos of one guy, the luckiest, and boy should be running the Olympics for the high jump, because an arrestor cable broke behind an aircraft and came across the deck, and he saw it, and he jumped up. He did a standing high jump, and he cleared that cable. Not once, but twice. If you watch the entire video, it comes back at him at a lower level. So anywho, getting off of the gruesomes and that, but winches can be gruesome, and that's the thing people need to take into account. Everything from seeing the hitch balls recently going through windshields, because people are pulling from the hitch ball, and I've heard all the excuses. The point is the hitch ball went through the windshield. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I know the ball itself didn't break, because the ball itself is designed to pull a trailer, but the hitch or the bolt that bolted it down or the nut or that bolted it to, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You had a projectile 2 5/16 come back and go through a windshield and go through a person. So,
it just takes a minute. And this is where I kind of like, there is no excuse for being methodical in safety.
For not being methodical in safety.
Thank you. Well, we even had that situation when we had there one teaching with Ron, how he did a vehicle, he backed up and
he towed from the front,
and everyone had a conniption fit about that, because they say you shouldn't do that. But again, he had a high pinion front axle. He knew his Jeep, and it really wasn't a panic situation. Yes, the person was panicked because the inside of their Jeep was getting wet,
it was filling full of water.
But at the same time, that's to me not a life or death situation.
No, it was not a life or death. But Ron also knew his Jeep inside and out. Unlike most people that are trusting factory tow hooks on a stock suspension with, and Ron is better educated, more knowledgeable would be the fair way to put it, to make that decision. Yeah. We talked about it a little bit, and I have to laugh because that was my old front axle that he did that with. So he knew that he had hardened axles, and he wasn't putting his life in danger. He was putting his equipment at risk. Right. Now, between you and me, if I'm trying to help someone out, I'll put my equipment at risk. I mean, within reason, particularly if somebody in that case was panicking. And he thought that was a good way to do it, and I can't argue with him. He made a judgment. Yes, a lot of people are like, that you're going to blow your front axle apart. It can't do that, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, I get it. Was he running on the load side of the pinion or the coast? He was running on the coast side. But he made a decision. And, of course, he's like the local expert on putting ring gears and pinions in, and if he blew it apart, he just put a new one in it.
Did I have it backwards? Because I thought the high pinion would be okay doing that.
No, it's still, even though it's okay.
Because I just want to make sure I'm not wrong on that.
No, it's not okay. It's a perception. Front axle gear sets are not just rear axle gear sets run in reverse. Okay. Which is what you would be saying there. They are actually cut in reverse pattern. There's a sloped side and a vertical face. The vertical face is the drive side. The sloped side is the coasting side. And a reverse spiral that's used in a high pinion or even a forward axle is cut so that the flat face is taking the load. It's nominally flat, by the way, folks, so don't pick on me. Takes the load driving forward. Okay. The coast side is still the coast side.
Doesn't matter if it's high or low pinion.
Doesn't matter if it's high or low pinion, if it's front or rear or whatever.
I learned something today.
Yeah. So each orientation, front, rear, coast, drive, is set up for that axle, high pinion, low pinion. What it is it's the thrust angle between the pinion gear and the ring gear is different on a high pinion because, of course, the thrust has to go, like on a low pinion, the thrust has to go up to go forward. Right. But the thrust will go down to go forward on a high pinion. Because you're trying to crank the wheel around. Or I may have those backwards. I apologize, but you can run your brain through it.
The idea is there.
Yeah. So, but no, we're talking about the difference there is the winches are powered unto themselves. It'd be like you getting in your Jeep, like let's use Ron backing up. Well, that he had to get out of his Jeep with it in gear, with it pulling to go make an adjustment.
Okay.
All right. But he's got a remote control in his hand. Okay, a winch with a remote control to me is the same situation. I have a piece of machinery running on its own with just a wireless controller. That so far I've seen 2 of them fail, which doesn't strike me as a great safety record.
Hey, I think when we get done with this show, since we have a little bit of time, let's take my controller apart and look for that corrosion.
Okay, we'll do that. So anyway, there's a service message for you guys. Check them out. If you have the wireless, that's fine. That's your choice. Be aware, though, that a winch is a very strong tool capable of doing great damage if it's out of control.
And that's why
Make sure you control it.
Well, that's why I mainly use the wired part of the controller because, again, while the wireless is cool, but I'm kind of old school. You know,
you notice what I did on Slightly Altered.
Yeah.
I have my plug in the front, and I have a plug on the side of the fender that plugs in so my controller can drape inside the door, or I can stand behind my open door and use it as a body shield should I get a break. And I am running synthetic. But then again, that's just the engineer in me won't let me, not do it smart.
No, I totally understand that.
So anyway, folks, we kind of drifted off that way, but that's kind of what we do. That's this is almost as if we recorded it while we were driving the vehicles over to get, supplies, materials, etc., or food. We commonly do the food one. Unfortunately, if you just see a picture of us, you'll know how that happens.
Not unfortunately. I like eating. Where we went today was good.
Yeah,
of course, it was pasta. Now I'm tired.
Yeah. All that carb loading.
And the breadsticks.
And the breadsticks. And the pizza slice.
And the pizza slice. And the chocolate cake.
But again, think about it when you're planning your build or when you are doing your build. What are you trying to achieve? That's the key of this whole discussion that we're having is what are you trying to do? If you're out there and your plan is to go to the rock pile and be the number one king of the hammers, by all means, you're going to need wheel size. You're going to need high pinions. Then you need the suspension lift to support those wheels.
Yeah.
And or cut the body. Our friend Robert is building a totally bad beep. You can beep it out yourself, a TJ. But his goal is to go out and do the rocks. Okay. That's what he likes, and that's his goal. So he has taken the approach of looking at low center of gravity, as low as he can get it reasonably.
Right.
And he's got huge cutouts for the wheel wells. He's used wider axles for stability so that he can run the larger tires and the V8 power to be able to get up these obstacles. And I think it's a fantastic build put together by somebody that has really, he lives what we try and teach you guys. Do what you want to do with your Jeep. Do your research, do your plans, and build it your way. And he is going full Monty on that particular project. Yeah.
And even to me, because this Jeep has significance for, Kevin and I and our little Senator group, because it used to be our friend Brian's. And now it's Robert's. And I think what Robert's doing with that Jeep is excellent. I'm very envious of that build because he is making that thing to be the bad Bama Jamma.
Yep.
Because, again, his attention to detail from the rhino lining on the outside, the ORI, I think it's ORI he's running, the wheel choice, the tire choice. I mean, he's doing himself some justice.
Oh, he has moved the suspension points on the struts to reflect what happens in those kinds of environments. He is taking this and building a one-off personal vehicle that looks like a Jeep.
Oh, yeah.
And it's absolutely incredible. So when you guys do your own thing and take a look at it, remember that, okay, ground clearance is important. There is no question about it. But the other thing is, probably as important to that is learn to drive. Know where your differential is. Know how close it is, as far as the tire. Put your tires to protect your differential. If you protect your differential, by the way, you'll protect your drive shaft.
Yes.
And then you have to remember, though, that on a Jeep, your differential is on the driver's side, on the front, and it's down the middle in the back.
Yes.
So you have to also have a mental picture of the belly of your Jeep. And
trust.
now the good thing is when you've worked on them enough, you kind of have a personal view of them laying on your back, looking up at the belly of your Jeep. And you want to put your wheels and you want to put your differential out of harm's way. And then as you come down off of it, you should have that middle pan, because that is your transition zone where you've got to get the rear of the Jeep over so that you don't take out your rear drive shaft and your rear differential.
Right.
I have seen people with small tires make it through unbelievable obstacles because of their driving ability.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, I've seen people go through with monster modified rigs and go through on sheer bravado and right pedal. But, you know, your choice. If you want to be the guy that goes through on gas pedal bravado, more power to you. If you want to be the person that goes through on skill, guile, and ability, you'll definitely get me watching and giving you a thumbs up at the end.
It's like that guy in Jasper in front of you with the TJ. Was it the TJ or the YJ?
It's a
Street
TJ.
tires and just getting through. And meanwhile, the guy behind me in the 44s and or the 60s with the 40s and the V8 had to do 3-point turns everywhere. And he kind of looked at me with contempt because I was going through these in a non-lifted Rubicon Gladiator and I didn't have to do 3-point turns.
Yeah,
it got scary, but
well, that's another thing that we don't ever talk about, but that's like adjusting your steering, you know, and Robert's looking at that on his. He's making sure that he has enough angularity in his steering to be able to maneuver. Mm-hmm. There's a whole basis, and they call it mechanical engineering, automotive, to knowing how to put these pieces together. And this is one of the reasons we talk about again and again and again about if you're not that skilled, choose an engineered kit that puts all the pieces together for you. I'm not going to push any particular brand, although, you know, we've had a certain one on the show here that my opinion is they make a really good kit. But everything, it's a kind of a Jenga, you know. You change the lift, you change your suspension, that changes your steering angles, which changes, you know, the activity of any sway bar that you have, which may change how your brakes work and the angles on your drive shaft. There's this chain of impacts to almost every little thing you do. Okay. Hence my experiments. And this is just me. I'm not trying to sell anybody, as Scott knows, is that I'm running 33s, 12 and a half 33s. Okay. On a 3.5 inch lift. And I still had to have a custom front axle built because I insisted, just me, on having a good pinion angle on my front axle and good caster, not or, and, which meant I had to have my C's welded on to the tubes with almost 8 degrees more difference between the pinion angle and the C angle than factory. And that was so that I could have a neutral pinion angle and, you know, good caster. And as such, it's funny, but I've got a very capable little Jeep that will fit through most tiny trails without a problem, which is kind of fun when I watch certain gladiators following me, as was JK's following me. That had a horrible turning radius.
That blue one especially.
Yeah. But, you know, and I like going to events where people are like, you sure you want to try and take your Jeep through there? Yep. Yep. I'm not afraid to stop, get out, walk, set a line, get back in. But I'm not going to brag too much, but I have yet to get myself so stuck that I couldn't get myself unstuck. Okay. I'm not going to say I don't get stuck, folks. That would be lying through my teeth, but I can usually recover myself. And then usually go ahead, and I've recovered a few others. I still think the best one was towing the Jeep in with the gas tank strapped to the hood.
Well, here's what I want to suggest.
Yeah.
Let's do an OTT first. It only took us 7 years. I'm thinking that the next time we should steer the audience in the right direction. If you have some steering questions, maybe the next show we should cover should have at least a segment on steering.
That's fine.
Like the Curry Correct links, you know, how the
crossover links versus inverted Y link versus
assist versus full hydro.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's been a great one out there, video, YouTube of, for those of you who know, Matt's Off-Road. He has a great YouTube channel, does stuff out in the Midwest, does a lot of recoveries. And his son worked in the shop for years and went on, he's his own channel. And he made an XJ with full hydro.
Okay.
No mechanical override, which, by the way, is DOT illegal in many, many states. Because if you lose your power steering fluid, if you lose fluidity, you lose steering, period. While you're still moving, which is pretty bad. But anyway, he decided to try it. And he had a failure.
Ouch.
And he's just he survived it without, it didn't even crash the Jeep, but he's like, yeah, no. If you're off-road only on a trail with low speeds, yes, get away with full hydro. They do it all the time, rock bouncers and that kind of stuff. It sometimes works great because you can put your steering rams right on your axle and you don't have to worry about it. There's no steering shaft to get driven into your chest if you crash, kind of thing. But you have to be ready for failure, okay? And that's the reason why steering shafts, mechanical steering with hydro assist is the number one, swap over. But we'll talk about that in another show.
Yeah, because that's one of the things.
I just figured I'd salt them a little bit. That way they can send their angry emails.
Kevin if you do have a question, though, onthetrailpodcast at gmail.com, Facebook Messenger, everything else, we will gladly say hi to you. But I do want to say hi to a couple new listeners that just wanted to say hi to us. So we will going to have to say hi to Stephen, to Smith Stephen, and George, and of course Brandon and John. Thank you for your messages, guys. Yep. We really appreciate this. One of them just, a couple questions about tires and wheels and sizes, and one just picked up a 49 CJ73A BCD. I forgot, my apologies, but you get the idea. So
I'm not even sure where you're going with that one.
Neither did I. My brain just went halfway through that, But then again, it is one of those kind of things. So with that, if you have your emails, go ahead and send them. And again, any questions are onthetrailpodcast at gmail.com. But I think it's time we hit the trail, put the Jeep in 4 low, and forget to say I hit the trail already.
That's okay. At this point, at show 180, I think people are pretty well used to us. And if you're new, sorry about that. Scott's been flubbing his lines for the last 7 years. Mm-hmm. So, and you know what? We're not really hung up on lines. We're hung up on Jeeps.
Exactly, yes. So, as always, take nothing but pictures, memories, and your trash when you leave the trail.
Please, we want to keep our trails open because they do get shut down. Mm-hmm. And usually because people are breaking the laws or leaving them a mess. So take care of what we've got. We want to leave them there for our kids and our kids' kids and probably the rest of humanity for as long as we're on this planet.
Yay! Go humanity! So with that, we'll catch you guys on show 181. Again, any questions about steering, just let us know, and hopefully we cover that as a show topic.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.